Hi guys! No, you cannot write yet, but we are getting there. We have some major elements in place. We have our theme, our plot, our world, our main entities, and our major characters. Now it's time to decide on the plot structure, on the story structure. What is a plot structure? What is a story structure? This is basically schematics of your story branching. What endings is your story leading to? What arcs are there? How many are there and how are they connected? How do they branch out? So it's about story being different each time players read or play your game. Now, don't confuse it with something called game structure. The diagrams look the same and very similar, and I provided you a link which will show you example of game structures, but plot structure is how your story moves. Game structure is how your game moves, and it can, because game structure can involve all kinds of game elements and interactions, boss fights, mini games, whatever. I'm talking about plot structure here. So basically, when you write a game or story with branches, you will soon see that if you just keep branching out, you will get this huge tree. This is called time cave game structure, because your game ends up being like a huge cave with labyrinth of choices, and it's suitable for short games that don't have a lot of plot. For example, I want to write a game where players explore my world. I will use this time cave structure where they will just explore. It be a long horizontal storyline and a short replays. In order to save themselves from madness and from writing hundreds and thousands of words, games and game writers usually branch and bottleneck. You saw this diamond sort of structure. So this is also a game structure. That's how game flow is made to enable both readers and writers to stay sane and to follow the story. But let's return to the story structure. Two basic story structures: plot-based games, character-based games. Plot-based game structures and character-based game structures. So what's the difference? The difference is, in plot-based games, the story differs, the story arcs differ based on what kind of change main character enacts in the world. So actions are more important. You will recognize this kind of games with strong plot, with strong fixed main character. There is very little personality changing questions. So this structure is about how player influences the story and influences the world around him. For example, it's very common in romance games, where player simply arrives to some school or something, then he meets different girls and then decides which one he wants to bang, and there's no moral choice involved. He just prefers this or that girl, or makes actions that take him towards this or towards that kind of ending. Actions are more important. Of course, there will always be some sort of attitude involved, like do you go for the spunky girl or do you go for the popular girl, blah blah. But actions are most important and focus of this kind of stories. The common root is what remains the same with each play. The common root is like the common story that player always has to experience before the story branches out. And then the arcs come which drive story towards the end. So this common root is usually short in this kind of games, because we only use it for exposition and introductory episodes, and we'll cover that in the next class. So if you want different endings to be result of how player interacts with the world, pick this structure. Also, if you want your main character's personality to be more or less stable and same, fixed, known. Also, if you want story to have many side branches, arcs, support characters, this is more viable solution. And also, very important, the focus of this kind of story is happening after the initial build-up, which means that they can be parts of the story which player misses out. There can be some parts that happen after the branching, and basically whatever happens in the beginning of the story sets the place, but it's not critical for the ending. The big main thing happens after the player decides where to go, what to do, etc., etc. So I've shown you, I've given you the example in sort of diagram, explained what's what. But for example, we want to make a game where player is a spy, and then he has a choice to fight the opponent, to flee the opponent, or to find some sneaky solution. It sounds like a emotional or attitude, like is he brave, is he not brave, or is he clever? But it's actually action-based choice. Why? Because the world and the story is different according to each choice. For example, if he fights the opponent, kills the opponent, there's no more opponent in the story, you have to factor this in. The world has changed. It's not the same story afterwards. If player flees, the opponent survives, and he misses some events that happen on that spot. So yeah, there's a part of story that player misses out, didn't read. Or I don't know, if you find sneaky solution, then maybe opponent runs away, and then you have a villain who will ambush him next time. But this is the focus, like how players' actions affected the world around. The character-based games, the character-based structure, have simpler branching, generally speaking, and longer common route, because you need to introduce your player to the story, to do the character, to set up things, to have introductory episodes, but also the main focus of the game happens before the big final choice, the big dramatic point, because basically these kind of stories are like interactive, gamified personality tests. Again, it doesn't have to be about personality or morals. It can be about being consistent, acquiring certain skills, or solving certain puzzles. But the base thing is these sort of tests that come before player. You will recognize these sort of games by they trying to maintain neutrality of players' interactions. For example, you arrive at some character, and then you can be rude, nice, or neutral, And then the next character you meet, you have again these three same choices. The game forgets what kind of personality you would decide to go with, because the point of the story is to reset these answers, so you can get fresh value input each time, so that when the score is tallied, we can decide if you were a good boy or bad boy or neutral boy. So basically, the story changes according to skills, emotions, attitudes, moral choices of the player. A lot of racing sims use this sort of approach. For example, Princess Maker, like you decide for your girl what will she do, and then in the end you have different choices that pop up according to the skills you picked or attitudes you displayed. Or for example, in Long Live the Queen, you acquire some skills and they're being tested at certain points, and basically the game is like a big puzzler like this. You decide what to do, and then in the meantime, and then when the test comes, the score is tallied and you'll be directed towards one choice and another. So yeah, this game has linear game structure but character-based plot. So basically you want this kind of structure if different endings and different story arcs depend on attitude of the player, or some sort of personality trait, or skill, or consistency. If you want player to sort of build their own persona during the game. Yeah, these games also have set character in the beginning, like you don't start as a blank slate. You start as something like, oh, you're this kind of boy. We don't go into details. but you're student or soldier or whatever, and then you pick up from there and build your character. If you want events and decisions to be branching, deciding on how characters solve them. If the focus is on how, then it's a character-based plot structure. For example, if in this spy thing, if the plot remains more or less the same, like you have the encounter, you decide if you're going to fight, flee, or do something, tricky, and then the story continues regardless of your choices, that's a character-based plot structure, because it was just a test for us to see if character is a brave, coward, or smarty pants. So looks, maybe sounds a bit confusing to you, but read it again and again and again till you get it, because it's really important, and points are really fine, like is it about what kind of change players make into the world by their decisions, or how do they decide to go about doing things? So yeah, and the climax of these kind of stories are happening before the branching, because at the climax points you're basically steered toward different endings and different story arcs, because that's when the test is tallied. For example, I don't know, it can be a game about some Halloween, dating, whatever, and then you mingle, you meet other girls, you have some episode, blah blah, and then when the final moment of high peak of the night arrives, then game crunches numbers and says, oh, okay, this happens or that happens, because it's a result of your attitudes and decisions. So yeah, this is important because you have to know what kind of game are you building in the start. I provided the link towards different game structures that you can use for your game, but have in mind that these plot structures are how your story interacts, how your story changes. And it's important because you have to have clear goals for your writing, and you're starting to build these goals. Also, the answer to your question is yes, you can combine in one game both plot-based elements and character-based elements. So choices, they can also affect how player deals with stuff, as well as what do they do. But that's why it's important to understand these two structures, so you can know which part of your game are plot-based and which part of your game are character-based, if your game is complex and runs long enough, and yeah, you can repeat, you can have overall big picture as some sort of linear game, like choices that eliminate players and run towards the end. But each episode can have different, in one episode it can be important what character does, in another episode it can be important how does he do it. So you can combine these, but the basics are here and important for you to understand and to apply to your story. So let's build it. How do we proceed? First, as always, take a good look at your plot and your team, and try to discern, is your game predominantly character-based or predominantly plot-based? If you plan to make a complex game, how will you intertwine these elements? Will you have a big branching and bottlenecks, or will you have some sort of structure that has plot-based and character-based episode, or like do they intertwine through your story? Look at your team and your plot, and try to see what's the minimum amount of endings needed. Oops, whoa, plot structure and ending. Yeah. The plot structure is best plotted if you have in mind how the game starts, what's the necessary events that have to happen, but which player always has to experience, and then what kind of endings do you want to have. These endings will show you what are the connecting structures. For example, I was making romantic interactive fiction, and the theme was like be yourself, don't be a hustler. And the plot was like different activities on the love cruise for singles. So I wanted the main character to steer this protagonist. Like, do they allow them to be honest, the lying, or do you push them to be honest? And yeah, since it was a romance game, I had to include choice of two different girls. and I decided to to sort endings like, okay, good ending with one girl, bad ending with one girl, good ending with another girl, bad ending with another girl, some sort of catch-all bad ending, like whatever happens when I want to eliminate player from the game. And I decided to flavor the game with some sort of secret character which sort of picks neither of these two girls, because it was important for my team. Like, what if player is given the chance to be neither himself nor lying? Like, maybe what if he encounters some kind of character which leads him to some sort of clean slate? So yeah, that's why I included the secret character. So yeah, you make an inventory of a minimum number of endings, and you will see that they automatically lead you to how this story is branching, what kind of routes you will have to have. So for example, if I want a good ending with girl A and a bad ending with girl A, so yeah, I need one branch that decides towards this girl, and then two more for one more fork that determines which of two endings will be picked. So why is this important? Because that's how we start developing our plot. We have our start, we have our ending sorted out, and our lines will have to be drawn. Like, do you want to further complicate this? Like, do I have girl C, which is neither good or bad, which is some sort of a distraction, and she doesn't even have an ending, or like she leads to some bad ending? Or do I have girl C, which is adding another layer? Like, okay, he cannot just pick between two girls; he has more girls to pick from, and each have their own good and bad endings. What if I decide to have a harem ending, like where he gets the both girls? So you have to draw these lines and these endings out. It's very important. So yeah, that's what I want you to do, to take your theme, to take your plot, to decide on the structure, to plot it out, to determine minimum endings, and then to sketch or draw or write your story structure. For example, I've given an example like, okay, let's write a character-based game. So we have a start, we have a long common route with some sort of tests. For example, let's make it a theme is like, is sanity always good? Maybe insanity is sometimes also okay. And let's say the plot is some sort of theme park gone wild. So we have a start, we have a long route of episodes, which will determine if player chooses sanity or insanity, or to act sane or insane, or simply placing him in some situations and episodes where this choice is the carries heavy relevance. So we'll lead the story to some dramatic point. I don't know, when lights go up on and dawn comes, or police gets him. So we'll have some dramatic point. You don't have to know what kind of dramatic point you will have. Just note it that out here we have dramatic moment, and then the same story branches. Like, okay, let's take a story towards good endings with sanity and bad ending with sanity. Also insane branch, and remembering your theme. Make sure to spice these endings, and that's how you find them. Like, if I want to prove that sanity is not always good, maybe I want to kick out the good ending in sanity branch. Maybe I just want to keep several bad endings. Have that in mind. You don't always have to have good and bad ending. You can have several bad endings, for example. That's why I ask you to think of your theme, because that's what will determine what you want to say, what you want to express will be woven into this. How many endings do you have to pick? So yeah, we'll expand from there, but that's what I want you to do. Read well the document. I'm sure it will be more clear than this rambling of mine, because this is not an easy topic to ramble about, especially if you don't know anything about it. So I invite you to talk to me about this, ask me questions or whatever you need, because yeah, this is very deep and complex theme. And let's just cover the basics. Let's just plot out our story structure. Good luck, and see you on Tuesday.